Welcome to our CS Global Partners webinar of 1st April 2020. CS Global Partners is a legal and marketing consultancy firm headquartered in London with offices worldwide. We specialize in citizenship by investment, believing the industry to present a unique win-win solution for governments and investors alike. Today, we're here to learn about St Kitts and Nevis and its Citizenship by Investment program, known globally as the industry's platinum standard. It is the oldest and most famous program of its kind, dating back to 1984. In its essence, it allows foreign investors to make a significant investment in St Kitts and Nevis in order to obtain citizenship of the nation. The program has helped St Kitts and Nevis overcome considerable challenges, including the closure of the sugar industry in 2005, the global economic recession of 2008, and the aftermath of Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017. Throughout it all, the program has consistently provided a premium service to investors worldwide. Fast forward to 2020, and we face very different challenges. We have invited Mr. Les Khan, CEO of the St. Kitts and Nevis Citizenship by Investment Unit, to discuss his Citizenship by Investment program, the benefits it provides to investors, and its future direction, being mindful of today's current challenges. Mr. Khan has led the CIU since August 2016 and is responsible for overseeing its day-to-day operations. He is also responsible for spearheading some of the industry's key due diligence and processing developments. Mr. Khan, welcome.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Before we start our Q&A session, I think our audience would benefit greatly from watching a short video introducing St. Kitts and Nevis and its very successful Citizenship by Investment program. Familiarize ourselves a little more with St. Kitts and Nevis, let's start our in-depth Q&A session with Mr. Les Khan. Mr. Khan, the St. Kitts and Nevis Citizenship by Investment program is the second citizenship program for high net worth individuals. Do you think investors will look at it differently in light of COVID-19 developments?
Absolutely. From all feedback from agents and developers, both in the Middle East and China, the interest has already started to peak. It is now considered that second citizenship is an insurance policy. It is something that people have now recognized that they need. And high net worth individuals who did not have it before, especially from the Chinese market, are beginning to recognize that they should have this second option, the second insurance policy. So we expect that we'll be seeing an uptick in applications coming out of China, and feedback from agents in the Middle East indicate that applications have already started to increase for the similar reasons.
Okay, so you've mentioned peaking interest in the Middle East and China. Who exactly can apply to become a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis?
Well, anyone who's over the age of 18 who qualify under our strict due diligence policies and practices. They must be of good moral character. The family members are included in the application, and all dependents over the age, up to the age of 30 can apply. Parents of the main applicant can apply as long as they're over the age of 55.
Mm-hmm. Is there anyone who can't apply under the program?
Well, anyone who has a police record, who has been detained and has spent time in jail would not qualify. Individuals who have been refused a visa from a country that we have visa-free access should not apply until they have or obtained a visa from that specific country. Those would be the reasons why a person should not apply. A person applying who might get rejected would probably get rejected for reasons of credibility, being a reputational risk to the country, and also who can be determined through our due diligence practices that they may represent a security threat to the country and to our international partners.
You really focused on the due diligence element there. Why is due diligence so important to the program?
Due diligence ensures or assists us in determining who can qualify. We have to remember that citizenship is not a right. You know, it's a privilege. And when we grant citizenship, we want to make sure that the individuals who are granted citizenship are of good moral character, good repute, and can contribute to the country in the long term. We also want to make sure that individuals are not or cannot become a ward of the state, meaning that they have the good and sound financial background to ensure that they can sustain themselves. But most importantly, we have to remember that citizenship by investment is to create a situation of foreign direct investment. So we want to make sure that individuals have the resources that they can invest in the country and ultimately give the country the benefits of this program.
We've heard a lot about the due diligence process. In practice, what kind of checks are applicants subject to?
Well, the due diligence process starts at the point of where an agent, let's say in Dubai or in China, is screening his applicant. He or she would normally run a world check, world compliance, do some background checks on the individual to ensure that whatever the individual is saying in the application is true. We recommend to all our agents and sub-agents that they do follow the strict process and that they ask their clients to be as honest as possible with them. Because when the application now leaves the agent and it goes to our service provider, and I'll just touch base on the service provider. By law, the department cannot take an application from anyone other than a local approved service provider. And they are regulated entities on the island, unlike the other islands where a service provider is approved by the unit. Here, a service provider is ultimately approved by our financial regulatory body and then become a service provider. So what we did a number of years ago, a couple of years ago, was mandate that a service provider should also run a due diligence check on the applicant. Because when I took over the unit, one of the things I realized that was our service providers were acting as a mailbox. They were just taking the application from an agent and bringing it to the unit, but they weren't understanding the client and the documentation that the client provided. So we mandated that they run a due diligence check and that they submit that due diligence check with the application. So that's two levels there already. When it comes to the unit, first thing the unit will do is obviously verify the documentation that is being provided by the applicant to make sure that the information stated on the application form is equal to the hard copies of documents that we receive. At that point, we acknowledge the file and then we send it to an international due diligence company. And we have about 6 of these and sometimes more than that, who specialize in certain regions and can do specific checks on the client. These due diligence companies will first look at open source, will check what's in the media, and any information they can get online. But the most important thing that they provide is that they send the information and they send an agent, one of their sub-agents, on the ground to where that client resides. And that agent then discreetly confirms information that is put on the application form. Like, for example, the local records, civil registries, any local media will be looking for information. They will do some background checks and see if references can be made discreetly. They'll check employment. They will check, you know, the individual's financial situation, as much information as they can provide. And they amalgamate all of this information and provide us with a due diligence report. At the same time that we send this information to the due diligence company, we also send it to what we call international law enforcement. There's an agency in the region who is responsible for coordinating all of the data from various international partners like the US, Canada, EU, UK, and they will check the information against any databases that they have, which will entail criminal records, anti-money laundering, and terrorist activity, terrorist financing, terrorist links to terrorist organizations. All of this is done by that international law enforcement group. We will not make a decision in our unit until we get both pieces of due diligence, one from the due diligence company, one from international law enforcement. When the information comes back, we then validate what was stated in the due diligence report against what was stated in the client's applications. And if there are any queries, anything that don't match, we will then do a query and ask the client to explain. A lot of times we will come up with information such as, well, you were denied a visa in the UK, why didn't you disclose that? Mm-hmm. Some people know that they have been denied, or some people don't know they have been denied. It depends on the region. So that due diligence process then, you know, would take on the average about, from international due diligence companies, it will take about 20 to 30 days. But from international law enforcement, it could be anywhere 30 to 60 days. Sometimes they're earlier, sometimes they're later. But we have no control of that because that goes out to the various international partners. Mm-hmm. So, one of the steps that we are actually pursuing right now is enhancing our due diligence process by introducing biometrics. In other words, we are working on a deal, an agreement with an agency where all applicants will be required to go to an office of that agency and be fingerprinted and have various documents verified. Now, the fingerprinting side of it will take a while to move into operations because international law enforcement doesn't have a central database, and that will take a little more working on. However, from our perspective, it offers us the ability to do identity verification, which is something that does not happen right now. Identity verification by a bonded entity. So this is a major step that we're moving in right now. And I would expect later this year, by the middle of the year probably, we should have that up and running.
That sounds fantastic. And certainly a way to strengthen what is already a very extensive vetting process. Ultimately, would you say this translates into quite a burdensome process for a busy high net worth individual?
I think once the high net worth individual has provided all of the documents that is required, or list of documents, and has been honest in answering his questions and giving us the relative information, I don't see a burden. The burden comes about when there is information that turns up in a due diligence report that maybe the client did not disclose, or maybe there's a lot of negative media on the individual, then we have to decipher what's legit and what's not legit, what's relative to the client and what's relative to maybe the company he's working for. We have these issues. The vetting process that you originally mentioned is something that's very detailed here in the unit. Vetting is when you look at the due diligence reports and you compare it to the application files, and then you dig deep and you write a sub-report on that. Our vetting process goes through about 4 levels. You know, a junior person will go through the documentation and make a quick summary and a recommendation. Then it will go to a senior vetting officer and another senior vetting officer to make sure that the same information is consistent, or the story is being consistent. And then as part of that process, we'll do financial analysis, and we'll look at the bank statements. We'll look at deposits that have been made that are irregular. Why is there an irregular deposit being made into that customer's account? Why are there such large deposits or withdrawals? We ask questions about these things because one of the key features in our vetting process is anti-money laundering. So we have to look at things like that. You know, where is the source of funds? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from an entity that's a sanctioned entity? Is it coming from an individual who's a sanctioned individual, or an individual who might be lending the money to somebody or might be related to them, and that person is on a sanction list, or, you know, is wanted for fraud or something like that. So we try to tie the picture together. And this is why vetting is so important. And that is why there are so many levels of this.
Mm-hmm. So strong due diligence and efficient processing. Would you say these are the 2 elements that make St Kitts and Nevis the platinum standard of the citizenship by investment industry?
I believe that one of the reasons, apart from having the legacy of being the oldest, legacy of being the platinum brand, the fact that we have this process, the fact that we were one of the first units to put in an automated system. As you may recall, there was, you know, a year and a half ago, we were identified as the most innovative program, and we continue to be innovative in how we do things. The efficiency factor is very critical to processing and to our clients. And we are the only unit that offers a fast track service. And that's because we can stand by the fast track service. So high net worth individuals who want the applications to be expeditious, we can afford that facility through obviously a higher price, but we have the mechanism through negotiations with our due diligence providers and so on to work this through. And all of our staff are very tuned into what a fast track application is, and it gets priority from the minute it comes in the door to when it's a final approval.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that has evolved with time in St. Kitts have been the investment options you've made available. What current options does an investor have if he wants to become a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis?
Well, there are two categories. One is the Sustainable Growth Fund, which is a non-refundable contribution, where the single applicant is $150,000. And this in itself is one of those reasons why St. Kitts is a platinum brand, because at $150,000, we are one of the only islands that has has a high threshold of 150,000. Right? Most of the other programs will be at 100 for a single applicant. A family of 4 in St. Kitts and Nevis under the contribution method is about 195,000. And this makes it attractive for the families. So, you know, we priced to not necessarily go for the 100,000 threshold person, but to get the families. Because again, with our program, A citizen is a citizen. And if a family joins us, they can add dependents, they can, when their children have children, they will become citizens, and so on. And it's a very easy process thereafter. So the second option is the real estate option. And the real estate option is divided into two. One is the original threshold of 400,000. So for investment of 400,000 in one of our real estate options, you can resell that option for in 5 years. The real estate option at 400,000, you will have to, that goes to the developer, and the government fees will then need to be added on to that, which is about 75,000 for a family of 4. The second option under the real estate is more of a share option, which is a 200,000 option. And the difference between the two is one can be a share, the first one is a title, but in the second one, you have to hold your share for 7 years. Government fees are the same. So we are able to provide a client with either option, the one who wants a title, who wants to actually own property, and the one who wants an investment option with a rate of return from the investment in a share.
Let's now turn to St. Kitts and Nevis itself. The Citizenship by Investment program plays a huge role in the country's well-being. In what way have you seen it impact life on the two islands?
Well, it's significant. If you look in the last year specifically, and you have all of our main roads being resurfaced and being made more robust to withstand the hurricanes. This all came from the CBI. You look at the second cruise ship pier. Some of the funding for that came from CBI through the SIDF. So these are some of the few. There are certain social programs that have been initiated through the government and through cabinet. The poverty alleviation would be one of those. The roof replacement, there is a program to replace the roofs that were damaged during hurricanes and so on. This is all part of our program. So there are a lot of benefits that I believe historically we have not been publicizing. But I believe now we are, and it's becoming recognized that the program contributes to this. Now, at the end of the day, the CBI program is not the be-all and end-all of the St. Kitts and Nevis's economy. And I don't think it should ever be considered as such. It is intended to drive alternate strategies in the economy, tourism being one. And this is why, we have so much construction and buildings. Hotels coming on stream this year, I expect we have about 3 of them. In the last year or 2, we had the Park Hyatt, we had the Koi Resorts that was open late last year. These are all the results of the CBI program and a setup for diversifying the economy with tourism and other things.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the program will play a role in supporting St. Kitts and Nevis in light of the coronavirus outbreak today?
I think it will be most important during this period and in the short term thereafter, because it will take a while for the world economy to come back on the same standards as it was. Tourism and cruise ship business and so on, and airlines, that's all going to take a little while to pump up. So the St. Kitts and Nevis's Citizenship by Investment could have a major role to play in going forward.
And with respect to your offices, what measures are you adopting to ensure safety throughout this crisis?
Well, as the unit is identified as an essential service unit, a limited number of my staff will come into the office, but we are operating social distancing. We are ensuring that the safety of our staff is primary importance. It's important to note that as long as the banks are open, the unit will be opened. So we continue to perform social distancing. We continue to follow the regulations as defined by the government in terms of the curfews, in terms of access to our unit, service providers having to deliver or wanting to deliver documents or checks can do so once a day between 8 and 12. They can only come into the office one at a time. And at that point in time, we're using gloves and masks and disinfectants and so on. So we're making it very, very safe for our staff. We've had a number of staff who have come in and said, hey, listen, I have allergies. Well, actually, I have a thermometer on my desk, and every morning I walk in and I check the temperature of the individuals. I don't want anybody in the unit who might be at risk.
What would you recommend to a person who wants to apply for citizenship in St. Kitts and Nevis? What are his next steps?
Well, I would recommend that the individual reaches out to one of the agents who are authorized by the unit to promote the unit and to process applications. So I would direct you to our website, and there are a list of international marketing agents if you don't already have an agent. And those international marketing agents have access to our local service providers. Alternatively, you can look on our website for our local service providers and contact them directly. So I would recommend either or of these two, but in situations where you're dealing with a language difference and so forth, then you would want to touch with an agent in your location.
Thank you so much, Mr. Khan. Why don't we now open the floor to our participants and for some live Q&A. Let's start with our first question from Sadia. She asks, what happens if someone has an Iranian nationality and wants to apply for citizenship under the St. Kitts and Nevis Citizenship by Investment Program?
I'm afraid that will be one country that we will not take an application from. Our government has passed regulations that determine that applicants from Iran, Afghanistan, North Korea are not eligible for citizenship in St. Kitts and Nevis. Now, one might recall back in 2014, we would have had a number of Iranians who applied then. These are all okay, but if there are any additional dependents and so on, we are unable to process those additions.
We have another question about real estate. Question is, does the government protect my investment for my family if I choose the real estate option?
Well, the thing that needs to be recognized is that the real estate development is a private initiative. The government approves a real estate project under the CBI program and ensures that the price that real estate option is one of the two options, the 200,000 or 400,000. The only thing we can assure is that if the individual has achieved the 5-year timeline or 7-year timeline on the investment, that when they want to resell, the minimum to resell would be the government's fixed price of 400,000 or 200,000. As long as it's being resold to someone requesting citizenship. If they opted to sell it under a non-citizenship environment, then they would be subject to market conditions. If the market has moved down in price, then obviously that's a risk that the individual would have taken. If the market has moved up, then obviously that works in favor of the applicant.
And here's another question from Sudipta, who asks, if I've been refused a B1 or B2 visa for the United States, can I still apply to the St Kitts and Nevis program?
Yes, you can. The key to the visa refusals is based on our regulation, which stipulates that if you have been refused a visa from a country where we have visa-free access, then you will be refused until you get a visa. But we do not have visa-free access to the US or to Canada. Now, if through our due diligence process, has been identified that the individual was refused a visa for fraud or for corruption or something, then that will be a major factor that we will take into consideration and most likely will end up in a denial. In some cases, the client is able to explain the reason why he was refused a visa, and we ask for affidavits along those lines, and we will take that into consideration. The chances are that just a basic refusal would still result in potential approval.
Mm-hmm. And I have a question about specific documents here. What are the requirements for the birth certificate? What if it's not possible to get it from a country of origin because the applicant has been outside that country for more than 5 years?
There are certain conditions and certain criteria that can happen. We do request that the individual brings in original birth certificate. And if he doesn't have one, that he makes every single attempt to do so, either through the embassy or through getting access to someone in that country to make it possible. We make every effort and make a big deal of the birth certificates because we can basically approve a person without a birth certificate. However, our passport office will not issue a passport without a birth certificate. So this becomes a challenge. They will not issue a passport, so what's the sense? So we make it as a requirement in our process to ensure that they have a birth certificate so that the whole process can be complete. If you cannot provide that birth certificate, then it's a very, very challenging issue for us and for the applicant.
Of course. We have a question from Yuri Bender, who I believe is the editor at PWM for the Financial Times. He asks, what have been the effects of coronavirus on daily life in St. Kitts and Nevis? How has it affected the pattern of applications? And have any high net worth families attempted to get there quickly, perhaps to escape the virus?
I have to say that I haven't seen any jets flying in, so the high net worth individuals are not coming. Our country is in a lockdown, so there are no commercial flights or private flights coming in to the island or any cruise ships. The only thing that can come into the island is cargo at this point in time. As we stand right now today, we are in a lockdown, meaning it's a 24-hour curfew that's going to run until Friday. So everyone is at home, and you can see me in my leisure outfit at home. And that's because the whole country is in a lockdown right now to try to contain the spread of the virus. In terms of applications, as I mentioned in the interview, we do expect applications to continue. There are two scenarios going on at this point in time. There were files or applications that were submitted to service providers in the last couple of weeks, and these files continue to come into us. In the interim, what we've also decided on was to receive files electronically. So we're giving the clients the ability, and agents and service providers, the ability to submit the files electronically. A limited number of documents we're asking for at this point in time. But based on the significance of citizenship and our process in terms of due diligence and vetting, we will not grant approval until we receive all of the documents in hard copy. And one would ask, why would you go hard copy when everybody's digitalizing. It's important to note that our programs, the CBIs, is fraught with the potential fraud or people documenting certain details or enhancing certain details. And we want to make sure that we minimize the exposures that we have from individuals who might be trying to take advantage of this current environment.
It makes a lot of sense, of course, and also documents need to be notarized and legalized, which of course you check. I have two questions that are about rights that come with citizenship, and I think I'll try to merge them into one. One's from Tahir and one is from Umar. They ask, do my children get free education if I become a citizen of St Kitts and Nevis? And the other question is, can I live and work in the UK with citizenship of St Kitts and Nevis?
So I'll answer the first question. If you live in St Kitts, you're entitled to primary education, free primary education, and that every citizen is entitled to that. Once you get to tertiary education, obviously the universities would have some fees that would be applied. In terms of working and studying in the UK, you're entitled to visa-free access to the UK, but you're still entitled to register yourself. Now, I do know that individuals may go to the UK on student to study, but they can do so up to a period of 6 months. And at some point in time, they have to regularize themselves through the proper authorities in the UK. But it does give them access to going in there and on visa-free access. And this is, it should be noted that while a country may have visa-free access, or we may have visa-free access with one country or another, it is up to that country to allow the person to come in, even if you have a visa-free, a passport that allows you visa-free. So that country still reserves the right to reject or refuse someone access into the country.
Yes, they do. And keeping on the passport theme, I have a question here from one of our attendees asking, how long does the passport last and what is the procedure for renewal?
The renewal, so the passport lasts for children 5 years, for adults 10 years. And the procedure for getting the renewals, you can access renewals through our Consul General's office or the embassies, or we can go directly to the Ministry of National Security and request our passport office to issue renewals. A lot of times our clients will have one of their service providers or lawyers perform the tasks on their behalf.
Mm-hmm. I have a question that's related to COVID-19. The question is, do you expect any delays in due diligence as a result of the pandemic?
So far, we have not had any delays in our due diligence process. We've been in close touch with our agents on the ground and the due diligence providers, and we haven't seen any delays. Initially, our agents, our due diligence providers who were doing business in China were having some difficulties. But we circumvented those challenges by utilizing a due diligence provider in China who had access to the databases and information and was able to turn those due diligence reports around very quickly. As I said, in other countries, we still have not seen any delays in the due diligence. I would expect as countries go into a lockdown, it might become a little more difficult for people to mobilize, but at this point in time, no delays.
Mm-hmm. I also have another question along those lines from Maram, asking with what is happening with Corona, banks in St Kitts are still requesting updated police clearances and other documents but many countries don't have active government institutions. How do you address this?
It must be noted that the banks operate independently of the CBI program. I am working with the National Bank to try to make things a little easier, but remember that the whole issue with National Bank is the correspondent banking relationships. And a lot of the mandates are still there. There is no compromise on the funds and the due diligence that is required by our correspondent banks or by our national banks. So I don't see any relief coming in that direction. What we may see is how the unit may facilitate some of the service providers or so on with their checks or fees that are being paid. And that's something is a work in progress.
Mm-hmm. I have a question from Richard asking about China specifically. He asks, how can Chinese people apply given the exchange controls in China? And how does that work considering that China only allows one citizenship?
Well, we know that China allows only one citizenship. St Kitts and Nevis allows dual citizenship. So from that perspective, it's up to the client to manage his legal infrastructure. How can they get money out of the country? I'm afraid that's not my challenge. My challenge is making sure that I get paid for the investment and for the fees. And whatever funds are coming in are going through the due diligence process with the banks and even within the unit. So the number of high net worth individuals applying still seem to be increasing. We expect that increase. I think it's up to the individuals and their agents and the developers to assist and facilitate the flow of funds. The unit does not.
Mm-hmm. And just speaking about currencies, do you accept cryptocurrencies as payment?
No, cryptocurrencies are not accepted. We passed some legislation recently that provides for a framework for alternate currencies. One of the challenges with cryptocurrency is the liquidity of it and the fluctuation in price. So before we can accept this, there has to be an acceptance of the liquidity factor. And I think with that, in time, something may be done. I know one island announced that it would take cryptocurrency, but the way of doing it is not necessarily, it's not the unit's way of taking cryptocurrency in the true sense. We have one or two developers who may agree with the client to pay cryptocurrency. In other words, that developer or client or agent is willing to take the liquidity. The unit will get US dollars. So once it can be converted and US dollars is given to the unit, then we're good to go. Now we will accept, when we look at clients' source of funds and proof of funds, we will look at a cryptocurrency statement and utilize that as a means of identifying where his source of funds were or that his source of wealth. So we don't negate it altogether. It is a factor that we will take into consideration, but we cannot take cryptocurrency in itself.
Mm-hmm. I do have a follow-up question from if due diligence fees and so on, for those kind of fees, do you think you'll be offering some kind of online payment option in case you can't go through the National Bank? Is that something you'd explore?
There are ways of exploring that, and at this point in time, we're so keen on our due diligence on the anti-money laundering aspect that we refrain from taking monies in alternative ways. At one point in time, I had explored taken funds in credit cards. And that would have meant that I would have had to open an account with a national bank and have the credit card payments go in there. But when I explored it further, I was advised that regardless of how the funds are paid, due diligence still has to occur on the funds that are coming into my account, regardless of whether it came in from a credit card. So we're not really achieving anything. And so we have not processed that mechanism for payments.
Mm-hmm. I do have another coronavirus-related question. I think it's on everyone's mind.
Of course.
The question is from an anonymous attendee, and he asks, how do I apply for citizenship if currently I can't get documents certified or apostilled as everything is closed? Is there any way around this?
Yes. About a week or so ago, I sent out a notice to all my agents, service providers, and developers, giving them a list of documents that we're willing to take in electronically without the apostilles and without the notarization and so forth. We will utilize these documents once they come in electronically to the unit through a service provider, and we will commence the due diligence process. Mm-hmm. But as I mentioned before, we will not provide an approval unless all of the documents are received at a point in time down the road, and all of these documents must have the apostilles, the notarizations, and so on. What we're doing and trying to do is keep the applications flowing, get a jump on due diligence, and be ready at a point in time when documents can be provided.
Mm-hmm. I have an interesting question about banned nationalities. It says, could an Iranian, for example, be accepted if that person is the spouse of a main applicant who's not from a banned nation?
No, an Iranian cannot be accepted at this point.
All right. And here's another question. Can I be deprived of my citizenship once it's obtained?
There are 4 reasons why you may lose citizenship. Again, if it has been discovered that you have been refused a visa from a visa-free country, so that would be one reason. A second reason is if you lied on the application. If you lied on the application and we subsequently find it through continuous due diligence, which happens, we can and may revoke citizenship. The third reason would be if you represent a reputational risk. If at some point in time after you got approval, obviously you committed fraud and you were involved in certain activities that may bring ill repute to the country, we can revoke citizenship. And the fourth reason is if it is then discovered later on that you represent a security risk to the country or our international partners. And this would be obviously through terrorism financing and so on. Those would be reasons. And the steps that we would follow, the first step would be to revoke the passport. Mm-hmm. And then we can move to the next level, which is revoking citizenship.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And another question from an anonymous attendee. Interviews are generally not part of the process. However, applicants may be asked to attend an interview to explain parts of their application. How are these arranged?
Well, first of all, I have to say, for the last 4 or 5 years, we have refrained from doing interviews and on a face-to-face basis. And the reason for that is because our process is such an integrated process between the unit, the service provider, the developer, the agent, and ultimately the client. There's always that communication going around. So if a person is being given an intent to deny, which is where it starts, an intent to deny basically says that the unit is considering denying this application for X, Y, and Z. And the denial would be one of those 4 reasons that I mentioned before. And we have a conversation with the service provider explaining what the denial is based on. Then that agent may ask us to hold the file back while they discuss it with the client and while they may get additional information. And we will hold the file. So there's this continuous communication going on. In the case of a security risk, we will advise, but one of the things we advise the client is that if you have been flagged as a security risk, one way of getting around it, and I don't think there are many ways of getting around, but one way of getting around it is by traveling from whichever location through London, spending a day in London at least, then coming to the US, spending a day in the US, Miami, New York, or wherever, and then coming to St. Kitts. And that's the only time that we will have a face-to-face interview or discussion, because at that point in time, the client is presenting to the unit their passport with the stamps that they've been cleared through the whole process. Mm-hmm. We then take that information and we pass it to international law enforcement again. And we await international enforcement to check their database, utilize the information that is on the updated passports and the stamps and so on, and then they may get a clearance. If a client refuses to do one of the legs and they only want to do Europe, the chances are they will continue to be flagged and we will not be able to grant them citizenship.
Mm-hmm. I think we only have time for one more question. And I have a question here from Lisa Ann, who asks, I have a client who was refused citizenship of St Kitts and Nevis in the past. Is there anything the client can do to clarify his identity and try again?
An individual being denied in the past does not restrict him from applying again. All right, now it will depend on what he was denied for. And I would suggest in a case like this, they would contact the unit, ask us to look at the file again, and we would make a call on whether the individual can reapply. Mm-hmm. If a person was denied for security reasons, the chances are going to be very slim, unless somewhere along the line he was able to clear himself. All right, so we will make a try again. There's no guarantee. If the person was denied for a visa refusal and then subsequently got the visa or a visa, then absolutely that would be a good reason for or rationale for reapplying.
Well, thank you once again, Mr. Khan, for being with us. I know you must be incredibly busy right now dealing with the pandemic, as we all are, but we do really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
And to all the attendees, we do have a lot of questions popping up and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you.